Good afternoon, everyone. I'm conscious we're the graveyard shift, the last session of the day, so I really appreciate you taking out the time out to come and talk to us. My name's Arthur Kay, and I'm joined by the brilliant Chris Kimber, we're going to be talking a bit about really the big question around how cars in general have come to dominate space in our cities. And it's going to be a relatively we'll try and make it as, we're a small group, try and make it as conversation as possible, and we're really keen to hear your views and questions and comments and make it a discussion if possible. We're going to start off with, I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes or so with a few provocations to get us started. And those are based on my book, Roadkill, which came out last year, which I wrote with very strangely for a book like car, you might think, I wrote with a philosopher and an anthropologist. And we really started the framing of the book, really thinking around how we can live better together in cities and using the car as the vehicle to which to discuss that really challenging and complex conversation. And Professor Moore's grounding as a philosopher was really impactful for that. My background's probably less exciting. I'm more from the kind of transport, mobility, urban design, architecture side of things. And I think the three things that are probably relevant to why I'm interested in this subject is both as a board member of Transport for London, a board member of something called the Royal Academy of Engineering, and a professor of practice at UCL's Bartlett School of Built Environment, where we think about some of these challenges around how we can build better cities. So when we think about the car, and especially what we're sold to as the vision of what cars could be, they're usually having a brilliant time in a Nordic fjord somewhere. They're driving through nature, having an absolutely marvelous time. Or that's usually if it's a daytime advert. If it's an evening advert, it's usually a sleek sedan zooming through the city, usually with someone very beautiful sitting next to you on the seat there, and you're off to somewhere very chic in the city. But the reality for many of us, and I'm not sure how, I don't own a car, but I do drive. I'm sure many of this room similarly have spent time in cars beforehand, but the majority of our time in cars looks much more like this. It's, whilst the cars are in theory sold to us this idea of movement and great imagination that comes with that, they're actually taking us nowhere. And cars are static for around 96% of the time, parked for most of that, and in congestion and idling for a large part of that. And for the full small percentage of the time that they are moving, they're usually moving pretty slowly and having pretty miserable time in them. And globally, we travel around 17 trillion miles each year in cars as humanity. That number is going up rapidly. It may seem like it's not, because there are people in places like Hackney and in London and cities around the world who are beginning to fight back against the car and the car industrial complex, but globally that number is going up rapidly. And so the real question is not saying that if you love cars, if you love driving, if you have a brilliant time in them, for that we say actually lead into that, embrace that, you should enjoy that time in it. But for most of those 17 trillion miles, people are having a pretty unsatisfactory time within their cars. And this is really started with, or scaled up, I should say, with this image. And I wondered, does anyone know where this image is taken from?
Oh, is it the Metropolis?
It's a really good guess. Not, but very.
Is it before the cows, whatever scores in the 60s?
It's not
prediction of 2000, isn't it?
It is. It's a prediction actually of 19. It's a prediction of 25 years hence from 1939.
How needs cartoonish style?
Yeah, and it does look uncannily like some of our cities today in terms of how it's happened. So this was an exhibition as part of something called the New York World Fair, and they were bringing ideas of the most innovative ideas from all over the world to design what the best city in the world, the future city, could look like. And the organisers of the World Fair were absolutely thrilled this year in 1939 because they managed to get a really brilliant sponsor to help them with their exhibition. And the sponsor they secured was General Motors. Mm-hmm. And you'd be unsurprised to hear that General Motors' idea was to hire a designer, a guy called Norman Geddes, to think about how we could build the city of the future, the city of 25 years hence, with the car at the centre of it, to mean that we could drive anywhere to a point in time and have a brilliant time doing so. And so this was called the Futurama exhibition, where the cartoon in turn got its name. And it worked. Norman Geddes became, obviously the Second World War intervened. This was in 1939. But Norman Geddes became Eisenhower's mobility advisor. He wrote a book called Magic Motorways, and he built the American city around the car very much as per this. And not only did he then build that in America and North America, they then exported that incredibly successfully to cities all over the world. So We did one of our book launches in Dubai last year, and you have places like Sheikh Zayed Road in Dubai, which look uncannily like Norman Geddes in the Futurama vision of what that could be. And if we think this is that same road cutting through the middle here, and we think around the spatial elements of this, my background's in architecture, we think about the spatial elements as if this on the right, we have the center of a little town in Italy called Siena, which is a very beautiful medieval town. And then on the left, we have a junction in Dubai around helping you move around the city, and thinking about how we can use cities to make our spaces more impactful and more effective. Exactly. That's exactly right. And this is kind of like my little bit of history for the day. This is kind of how I'm visualizing our cities. And on top, when I found that this is an image from Henry Fuseli, who I'm sure many of you know as a brilliant painter, but I didn't know the etymology of what this little goblin-y thing is. And it's called a mare, M-A-R-E, and it's the etymology of the word nightmare actually came from this. And a nightmare appears in all sorts of cultures from around the world. And a mare is literally that. It's a little goblin, a mare that comes during the night and sits about here and constrains your sleep and gives you terrible visions in terms of that. And I think for me, that's the vision of how I see what cars have done to our cities in terms of this. And we knew this early on. This is a headline from a front page from the New York Times in 1923. Now, I'm not sure the last time you saw a headline. I mean, at the time, America had actually very, very small number of road deaths. In 1923, hardly anyone had cars. Hardly anyone was dying, therefore, from being hit by cars. And so you had, across the entire nation, hundreds or low thousands of road deaths. Today, over 1 million people around the world are killed directly by cars, and indirectly that number is an order of magnitude higher. And since the dawn of the car industrial age, cars have killed more people than all of World War I and all of World War II combined. So they are vast killers, but the way the car industrial complex is built into us in our society is that the chance of having a headline like this anytime soon is almost nil. And I'm conscious of time, so I might whiz through a few of these, but we really take in the book this idea that the car, Eisenhower famously warned, whilst he was building the interstate highway network, he famously warned of the military industrial complex, this idea of bringing together the state and military power, as we're seeing played out in the world very successfully today. At the same time, I think we should be as mindful of what we describe in the book as the car industrial complex. And that doesn't just include actually, BMW or Volkswagen or Tesla, whatever it has to be. It also involves the other interests that were unlocked through car centricity. And that could be as niche as, for example, the fast food. We don't include it here, but for example, fast food was a indirect creation from driving cars around cities because of the way that people were moving around cities. For example, roadside retailing and some of the elements that come from that. For example, oil, 65-ish% of all oil is actually used in private motor vehicles. So there's a whole bunch of things that flow from that, which are associated with the car, which need to be grouped into this, what we call the car industrial complex, which are financial interests that flow to this as well. And this here is taken from somebody called Peter Norton, who has written a brilliant book around some of these elements of the car industrial complex. And he frames it really in these different eras of Futurama. So if we take Futurama 1 as that image I showed you early on in terms of that model Norman Geddes created, then roughly every 25 years since, the car industrial complex has reinvented itself. It says, we get it. We understand that we have done terrible things to our cities. We understand that cars kill people. We understand that they congest and waste your time. We even understand they're quite expensive. We understand that they pollute our environment. But trust us, if you buy our next model, we will solve those problems for you. We're going to create a system which is going to solve congestion, it's going to solve pollution, it's going to solve safety, and it's going to solve any of those challenges that we may have from this. And we're seeing this played out in real time. So if we look at the marketing from a lot of the car companies in the UK at the moment, or indeed in cities, I'm not sure where everyone here is from, so from cities around the world, is that a lot of car companies say, we get it, the fossil fuel car has created issues, but trust us, if you buy our next model, which is a hybrid or an electric model, that would solve those problems for you. My fear is that we're actually going to end up with a situation which looks uncannily similar, whether we have fossil fuels or electric cars, or indeed what's coming to London this year is also autonomous cars. You know, we have big car, and we have now big car and big tech coming together and saying, we get it. Cars are dangerous. We get it. Cars pollute. They cause congestion. They're even expensive. But if you buy or use our autonomous car system, we will solve those issues for you. So our contention in the book is a simple one. I think one that Hackney is beginning to do a really brilliant job on, and I hope under this new leadership will continue that work, which is around how we can actually, yes, include cars in a mix of transport, but have less car dependency in terms of that. And so having walking, wheeling, cycling, and public transport as the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth options, and having cars as a last and worst option that sits within that. But that involves not just the way we typically have thought about how we split up. And, you know, my background is in architecture, but I do work in public transport and work in civil society as well in terms of these things. But that's quite unusual. A book like this would be written by a transport planner who has spent rightly spent decades being an expert in transport planning, and would be very unusual to spend a lot of time talking to architectural designers or to politicians or to business people or to early stage technology startups. And so the contention of how you can go about creating cities like this, especially cities that already exist and incrementally increasing density of places, is through some quite lateral thinking and through active collaboration with other professions and disciplines as well. And I'm a simple fellow, so the way I think of this is really, you know, we're at a point in time here. We have, through a whole bunch of good and bad things happening over the past, since the dawn of the car industrial complex, we've chosen to take this path, but we still now have a huge amount of power, and we're seeing this how it's working so well in Hackney in terms of how we can shape better cities through a lot of citizen action, through brave and vigilant politicians, and through making sure that the ideas, because they're being delivered in cities all over the world, the ideas that have already worked and been delivered elsewhere can be begged, borrowed, and stolen and implemented in your own neighbourhood. And if we look at some of these things, I mean, again, I typically thought of a lot of cities as you either had a rubbish city which was built from scratch around the car, or you had a kind of medieval core city, and the politicians in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s were so enlightened that they said, actually, we don't want the car. We're going to see into the future. We're going to see into 2026, and we're going to say, actually, let's not introduce the car. And this was my naivety and lack of historical knowledge in terms of this. But through writing the book, we discovered that a whole bunch of cities that we now love were originally designed, yes, as a medieval, but then they let the car in. So this is Amsterdam in 1971. They said, brilliant, let's have the car. But then through realizing, actually, do we want the car? We still want to use a car sometimes, but we want to proactively invite it into our space on our terms, not on the terms of big car or the car industrial complex. And so what they've actually done is invited them in and then very deliberately uninvited them, and then said, actually, we're going to really think through what parts of the city you're able to spend time in. And that unwinding was something that I learned through writing the book. Similarly, this is a city, this is Seoul, the capital of South Korea. They built a whopping great highway over a stream that runs through the center of the city. And it was a 6-lane highway. And again, this is a photo taken in the mid-1970s. And only in the last decade or so have they spent their time unwinding that, doing a huge infrastructure project to both build and then unbuild and re-daylight this river, and then introduce still some cars, some buses and other forms of transport, but also to create this vibrant new river, or re-emerged daylighted river in the center of Seoul, and had some huge economic prosperity that comes from this. And this is from Bangkok. This is a former tobacco factory and with a vast car park. And again, they have used some really thoughtful urban planning and design to turn this into what is known as a sponge park, and to, again, reintroduce greenery into the heart of Bangkok, rather than hand it over to the car industrial complex. And so a lot of the ideas here are actually around, I mean, the book has a what we call a crib sheet. It's got about 142 ideas like this that have happened and been successfully implemented from all over the world, and saying that we actually don't need to necessarily, I'm sure we'll be sold brilliant additional technologies or ideas that we can envision in the future, but a lot of the ideas already exist and simply need to be catalogued and implemented in your own neighborhood. So a lot of this is around what we call going back to the future. And my journey here today, I came up from Camberwell to get here today. My journey today would have been more or less exactly the same, despite what our tech overlords may tell us. My journey say maybe exactly the same if I'd gone from Camberwell to Hackney in 100 years ago, or more, before my grandfather was born, to today. So what does that mean? So I came here partly on a Lime scooter. So Lime scooters, I think, are a brilliant introduction into London. And when they came along in kind of 2016, 17, 18, I thought that's a cool thing. They need to sort out how they clutter streets and all the rest of it, but it's actually quite a cool invention and innovation. But then I found my kind of person of the year for 1916, Lady Priscilla Norman. Now, Lady Priscilla Norman was a brilliant person in many, many ways. She was a suffragette and a pioneer in amongst a whole range of other things. She was a snappy dresser, as you could see. This is a beautiful kind of Edwardian gown. But because she was suffragette, she was spending a lot of time zipping around town wanting to go and talk, maybe at meetings like this, about equal rights and a whole bunch of other really important matters around the democratic deficit. But getting on the tube at that time would have been maybe a bit smelly, a bit sweaty. She didn't want to have to walk fast between places. So her Autoped e-scooter, and it came in both an electric and a diesel model, was a brilliant way to be able to do that. Similarly, we know well that the bus at this point been around for a very long time, 100 years ago. The tube was at that point, 70 years old or so. It was already a well-worn piece of infrastructure. The train, obviously, so I got a train up to Blackfriars and then got the tube across and then got a scooter the other way. So these things all existed then. So this is an early mod. I mean, the electric car was invented before the fossil fuel powered car. So if we think in terms of Back to the Future, we need to remember that Mrs. Henry Ford enjoyed driving her electric car because she didn't like the grease and the oil that came from cranking up a fossil fuel car as well. So again, what innovation are we talking about? Is Elon Musk and Tesla the real brilliant genius that he tells us he is, or actually did these things exist and were already pretty successful products at that point in time? And that the fact that there were more electric car charging points in Manhattan in 1923 than there were in 2000. So what future, again, this challenge, what future are we looking for here? And are we really, despite what we're being told and sold, are these really the innovations that they tell us they are? The electric e-bike, there's an e-bike parking spot just here, was patented first in the United States in 1897. These things have been around for an incredibly long time, and we talk about a whole bunch of other stuff in the book, but one of the contentions is actually that we can find a whole bunch of these solutions elsewhere, and it's about thinking through how these integrate with our existing public transport system and how we can use them to proactively make our cities and societies better. And this is a diagram adapted from Richard Rogers' book, Cities for a Small Planet, and really incredibly simple idea that sits within it, which is saying that we've used the car as an incredibly attractive and powerful and the most economically successful product of the last 100 years. And if you own a car, you end up with the mindset of, if all you got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so everything from driving to the shops to driving to see your parents to driving to school is the obvious thing, but it feels sometimes like the easy and the cheap route to be able to go and do it, and you don't have a cognitive load to do that. But all we're really saying is that different journeys may require different transport options for the people in this room to be able to go and enjoy, to be able to take that range of options to be able to get from here to wherever you live after this talk today. And the challenge, and Chris will pick up on this as well in terms of how we can, focus this more on Hackney and how we can think about some of these things. But the challenge is a relatively simplistic one. It's saying within each of these transport options and how we're thinking about the infrastructure within our cities and making them better is really think about, we have choices now that will, over the next 10, 15, 20 years, whether that's the introduction of autonomous cars, whether that's thinking around how we reclaim our streets, all of these things will make our cities incrementally better or incrementally worse. And I believe that citizens have the power to do that. I'm going to hand over to Chris now to pick up on the conversation. We got plenty of time at the end as well for Q&A as well, to be able to zip through that. So thank you very much indeed for your time and attention.
Hi, so my name's Chris Kimber, and I'm going to talk a bit more about Hackney. A lot of the same subjects and topics that Arthur's raised, but a bit more of a Hackney focus. So just so you know who I'm a Hackney resident, and I am part of a group called Low Traffic Hackney, which is just a community group who support traffic reduction, active travel, safer streets. If you're interested in joining, there's some leaflets here. You can take one, and it sort of gives you our manifesto and tells you how to join for free, of course, and you'll get our monthly newsletter. So I'm going to start off with some stats, but bear with me because I've got some lovely photos of old traffic filters later, which I know you're going to love. I'm going to start with some, we'll get through the stats as quickly as we can. So as Arthur was saying, basically there's been a massive increase in the number of miles driven. So this Department of Transport slide shows you that since the end of the Second World War, motor traffic has increased hugely. So cars and taxis are the bluey, greeny, slightly reformed looking colour there. That's a bit worrying, isn't it? The kind of bluey green bit is the growth in miles driven by cars, and you can then see vans and lorries and then motorbikes as well. So it's worth. I was doing some research for this, and back in 1952, less than 30% of the miles driven were by private car. But by the late 80s, that had gone up to 85%. So 85% of miles sort of travelled in the UK were by private car. And in less than 30 years, the number of cars on our street doubled. So we're now at 42 million cars on our streets, which is well, it's a lot, isn't it? Let's face it. And in every year since World War II, apart from 2 years, there's been number of vehicles on the road has increased. Those years were 1991 and 2020. 2020 was COVID. What was 1991? Was that Gulf War? Maybe that was it. So yeah, apart from those 2 years, number of cars on our roads has increased every year since World War II. So where's all that traffic going? Well, there's a sort of trend here, which you may be aware of, which is that due to sort of technology, so initially sat navs and then now kind of mobile navigation apps, a lot of that traffic, the trend is that it's less and less on main roads and more on what we would call minor roads or side roads. So by main roads, we really mean A roads and maybe some B roads. But on the trend for minor roads, which are the smaller roads, is basically upwards. And the trend on the major roads is slightly downwards. What does that mean for us as humans? Well, it obviously has a massive effect on things like air pollution and road danger or traffic accidents. So this was a really shocking statistic which I found out, which is that despite improvements, Hackney has the third highest proportion of deaths due to air pollution in London. And this is the bit that really surprised me. It's nearly 1 in 10, 8% of deaths in Hackney are attributed to particulate matter air pollution, which really shocked me when I kind of found that out. So NO2, nitrous dioxide levels have decreased, mainly because cars have got better and they just emit less of it from their tailpipes. But actually, for PM2.5 and PM10, which is a particulate matter, is actually not decreased and is actually increasing as well. And one of the fascinating things from Arthur's book, and correct me if I get this wrong, is that about 60, even maybe more than 60% of the air pollution that comes from cars does not come from the tailpipe. And good, I've got this right. It comes from...
That's exactly right. So it's one of the
tires.
Is that tires and brake cars, this kind of stuff. There's some really research out of the Bureau College London in terms of this long view size there.
So I think that's, most people, and me included, thought that most of the air pollution was just coming out from the engine and coming out of the tailpipe. Actually, it seems that more than half of that is actually coming from brakes and tires and just the road. The act of a major piece of metal driving on the road throws up loads of dust, and that's where the PM2 and PM10 come from, and that is what is actually really one of the really major health risks to people living in Hackney now. Also accidents as well. So Hackney has really fantastic cycling rates. I think we have the highest cycling rates in London, and the casualty rate per trip, because there are so many people cycling, as you know, if you look out the window, the casualty rate per trip is low, but the overall number of accidents is still high. So the latest data we have is from 2014, and there are 117 people killed or seriously injured on the roads in Hackney. And for me, that's 117 people too many. So we, what do we do to make that safer for pedestrians and cyclists? Now, in terms of climate change, which we can't really ignore here, then land transport emissions account for about a fifth. In fact, I think it's 21% of the emissions comes from land transport emissions. That's for the UK, but also for Hackney as well. It's almost identical. And unlike a lot of other sectors, the electricity grid, but also buildings, industry, agriculture, which are in decline, that domestic transport figure for greenhouse gases is actually not declining. And you can see it here, it's the green line. There was a dip, obviously, for COVID, but actually it's pretty steady. And so, we're not seeing that reduction in greenhouse gases through from transport, which we are in other sectors. So let's go back to Hackney now. So this is specific to Hackney, again, from the Department for Transport. And what you can see is that despite the national picture being slightly different, inner London boroughs like Hackney are slightly different. So there actually is a peak of miles driven in Hackney in about 2002. So around about here, that's the kind of peak of miles driven in Hackney. Lots of factors behind that, which I'm not going to get into. It's not just what the council and the Mayor of London and other authorities have done, but the Mayor of London and the council have made significant efforts to reduce the amount of traffic and the amount of miles driven on the roads, and that means that peak is no, we're actually now in a small decline. However, both my lived experience, and I'm sure yours, and the data tells us that our roads are still way too busy with traffic. So there were 274 million miles travelled on Hackney roads driven by motor vehicles in 2024. And really worryingly is that since 2022, you can just about see it here, and I've done the numbers, there's actually a bit, we're now increasing again. So there's been a 2% increase in the miles driven since 2022, which is obviously it came back after COVID, and that number is now increasing, which is really going the wrong way. Really, one very interesting thing about Hackney, we're a relatively small inner London borough, but almost half, or 44% of traffic in Hackney is through traffic. So that means it starts and stops outside Hackney. So it's basically people who are coming in or going from somewhere else into Hackney, through Hackney, and then leaving the other side, and they're not stopping. So there's absolutely no benefit for us. We're not getting any commercial benefit or any other benefit. We're getting the road danger and the air pollution and the noise pollution from people just driving through, which is really, really high finger. And also in terms of the way people travel in Hackney, again, this is a kind of quite a surprising set of data. But first of all, almost 2/3, I think 65% of Hackney households don't actually own a car. So that means that if you own a car, you're in a minority in Hackney. 87% of journeys are actually made not by car, they're made by walking, cycling or public transport. And as you can probably guess from these figures, Hackney has the highest walking and cycling levels in London. So that's quite a lot of stats to take in. I'll be testing you on that all later. But there have been a lot of measures over the past 50 years to try and reduce the amount of traffic. And that's really what I'm going to get into now. So this is going to be the slightly more fun bit, looking at the way that the various Hackney Council in particular has tried to reduce traffic. So lots of people think of low traffic neighbourhoods, or LTNs. They're controversial, I know, but lots of people think that they're a new thing because since the pandemic, the council introduced, is it 90? They introduced a lot of LTNs in the borough. I think the figure's 19, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Because they were given emergency traffic orders, they were given the authority to be able to introduce them, and so they are controversial. Not everyone likes them. I do anyway. But actually, these are not a new thing, and I think this is the kind of really the core point of what I wanted to say here, is that this traffic reduction in Hackney is not something that's just happened since 2020. It's been going on a long time. So I'm not going to talk about these type of filters, which you'll be familiar with, because these are all the kind of new ones, the ones that have come in the last 5 or 6 years. Bonus points if you can name where those ones are. Anyone? Hackney. You win. He gets the bonus points. Okay. But what I'm going to start to talk about is something that happened over 50 years ago. So let's go back right to the beginning. So this is de Beauvoir, and there are local protests happening in 1973. So well over 50 years ago now, centered on the de Beauvoir area, which is between basically Southgate Road, a busy road, and the A10. These were taken by Neil Martinson, who was here this morning. Within 2 years of this, they had introduced filters. Some more pictures of protests here, trying to close down Downham Road, which is still not closed, unfortunately, but maybe it will be one day. So these protests led to that gap for those first filters going in, and now I'm sure you'll know it because a lot of people cycle through it. It's one of the prime kind of cycle routes to this part of London. You'll know this kind of area here where a lot of barriers going up, a lot of bollards, which stops people driving as a through traffic. You can obviously drive in and out if you're a resident, but you can't drive through it. And there are, and to be honest with you, getting a photo of these areas without about 1,000 bikes on it is quite hard. But thank you Google Maps and Street View that I managed to get that. So that's kind of the granddaddy of the filters in Hackney. But now I'm going to move on to a few favourites. Now, if I've missed your favourite traffic filter out, I'm sure you've all got favourite traffic filters in Hackney, and I know you have. I apologise, but it's a bit of a subjective kind of list of filters. So we're going to go back to not the 70s, but we think it's 1982. Trying to find the dates of these ones is actually surprisingly difficult. We think this is 1982. This is in Queen's Drive, which is near Finsbury Park, and it's part of the Brownswood low traffic neighbourhood. There's many filters there on roads like Finsbury Park Road, Wilberforce Road, Portland Rise. Now, introduced partly to solve a kind of curb crawling problem, but also to stop rat running to and from the Seven Sisters Road. Now, here's one of my favourites. We're moving over to Stoke Newington here. This is Statham Grove in Stoke Newington. We think this is 1980s. I love the design of this. It's a bit of an unusual one because instead of it being a straightforward gate, it's got these kind of upturned blocks or bricks, which I guess actually if you had a really big SUV you probably could drive over those, but let's not suggest that anyone does that. And this really was just to stop people waiting at the lights between Green Lanes and Church Street and cutting through this very, very tight. The road's about like 200 metres long, so it's not saving you much time, but it would stop you having to wait at the lights. So one of my favourites in the bit of Hackney that I live in, which is in Stoke Newington. Staying in Stoke Newington, maybe over to the junction between Neville Road and Wordsworth Road. This is now an area known as Butterfield Green. You probably know it. I hope you know it. Now, Amir Dotan, the historian who was here earlier and is giving a talk, I think, next Saturday, he has given a fascinating talk on the history of this area, which is on YouTube. You should watch it. But briefly, the photo top left from the 1960s is before the area was regenerated. Lots of very poor quality housing was knocked down, and they created Butterfield Green. So the photo there is taken looking north up Neville Road. Those houses where the two people are now gone, and that's Butterfield Green. And that road then, and part of the reason for the regeneration was that a lot of through traffic going down Neville Road into Wordsworth Road onto or from the A10. They then filtered that. Now, I don't have any earlier photos, but this one is from 2007 when there was a barrier, a gate at each end. And these were from the year after. Again, you can see that's from either end of it. It doesn't look like this now, but there were two physical barriers stopping through traffic going there. And you can see Butterfield Green has been created there. And then more recently, in COVID times and post-COVID times, here's a view of it. And the most recent one where they actually filtered this road here, which is Allen Road, I think it is. I'm just trying to remember. Allen Road. And also introduced a theoretically pedestrian cycling sort of separation zone, which has not been quite as successful as it could have been. But this is just a very good example of an area which is now very pleasant and does not have through traffic going on. Lastly, in Stoke Newington, Howard Road. We think this is a 1980s one. It looks a little bleak in 2008. But then some new flats got built and some big planters got put in. So by 2026, it looks better. And this view is just the other way around, looking out over the church there. Now, this is moving to east over to Upper Clapton. This is the junction of Casimir Road and Southwold Road. The filter stops traffic trying to avoid the Upper Clapton Road, which is often busy, by cutting through small roads. And this one gets a lot of love from local residents as it provides a safe entrance into the North Millfields recreation ground and helps with the nearby Southwold Primary School. Now we're getting into two of the real kind of like big beasts here. This is in the Kings Park area and to the east of Chatsworth Road. The area is sandwiched between Leabridge Road and Holmerton High Street, so not in fact very far from here. And you can guess what would happen before these filters were put in, allowing cyclists to pass through, but no through traffic. And the sort of sister filter for this is in Daubney Road, also in the Kings Park area, E5. Again, we think this is 1990s. And these two filters combined really mean that there isn't a massive amount of through traffic going through Kings Park. So it's a relatively safe and quiet area. In fact, surprisingly safe and quiet area if you happen to go around there. Without them, it would be very, very different. I can guarantee that. Now, if you've ever walked from Lower Clapton Road to Hamilton Hospital, which I have lots of times, then you will have seen this one. This is on Median Road, again, very near here, actually. We again think it's 1990s, and it basically stops people cutting through. And with the hospital being so close, I'm pretty sure that would be a huge amount of traffic heading to the hospital if that wasn't there. Moving to the south of the borough now, to Hoxton, this very simple gate on Phillip Street, close to St Leonard's Hospital, stops rat running to and from the Kingston Road. And this area of Hoxton actually has one of the lowest levels of car ownership in the borough. I think it's around 20%, only 20% of households own a car in that part of Hoxton. And then lastly, I know you're sad that this is coming to an end, but lastly, last but not least, and perhaps the biggest of the lot, Mare Street, or the Narrow Way, which is the northernmost section of Mare Street. So does anyone remember when this was open to buses? You do? Yeah, okay. I mean, because
Ordinary traffic.
Open not just buses, ordinary traffic. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of unbelievable. This was only 2014, so like less than 12 years ago. This was actually turned into the narrow way that we know now. But going back on Street View on Google and finding these photos, I was just shocked that such a narrow road would have loads of traffic going down it. So there's a couple of views of buses going down the narrow way. That's the other end of the narrow way, the top of it, which is extremely close to where we are now. And again, a bus going down there. And then these two photos are the other, what it looks like now, which is essentially a kind of bustling pedestrianised road with lots of shops and cafes and bars and restaurants and people visiting and of course, Marks and Spencer's. So there are many more I could have filled an entire afternoon with. And, I'm sure you're sad that I didn't. But if you're interested in the filters in Hackney, there is a great map on the Hackney Cycling Campaign website, which I think is hackneycycling.org.uk, which basically shows you every single filter in Hackney, and you can spend your afternoons and evenings going around investigating all of these filters. So that's the end of what I was going to say.
Very good.
Yes. So I think for this session, we're going to try and do it as a kind of more of a conversation with our new councillor as well, but a conversation with those in the room as well. So maybe we could, maybe if anyone would like to start off with a provocation or a question. Would you like to go?
I don't mind starting.
Yeah, Grant. Please.
So, usually e-bikes have been dealt with stink in the press for obviously dangerous e-bike riders. The central local legislation's there. What do you suggest for kind of making e-bikes safer, more normalised amongst everyone using them?
Well, I guess on this one, there's a official TfL answer in terms of it, and kind of DFT position on it, and then there's a kind of a common sense approach to it. I think a big piece is this around what in the kind of literature is known as autonormativity. We've become what I call car blind, that we see, when we saw that headline that I showed earlier in terms of the New York Times front page of nation roused by car deaths. I think the frustration that people live through, and the very real frustration that people live through, of having space cluttered and and perhaps we're not obeying rules properly, and all the rest of it in terms of those things is an annoyance, is often illegal, and is a big change in terms of that. But I think the wider context in terms of the way that motoring and the car industrial complex, this autonormativity has dominated our spaces, has dominated our cities. I mean, the fact that 80% of public space in London is given over to car space and space for cars and drivers is an extraordinary de facto reality. And you mentioned the fact of the low car ownership percentages in a city like in a borough like Hackney. So I think there's a piece in terms of proper regulation and enforcing that. I think
what's taking so long with that?
a lot is what I'd call kind of a slightly less ambitious legislative approach from Department for Transport in particular, which is basically, so technically everything you see on the street is still under a trial. So there is not a formal piece of legislation that says this is how, if you are an e-bike operator or an e-scooter operator, this is how to implement this and thing. It's an ongoing trial, and that trial has been going on, I believe, for about 7 years, which I think is a way to basically not make a decision, kick it down the road, and to be able to work that through. And I fear we'll be in a similar position of allowing it to happen through with as we look at the next form of big innovation in transport, which is going to be the autonomous vehicles that are coming into our cities this very year. Is that we're going to see a similar thing, I believe, in terms of trial after trial after trial after trial, which basically means that actually we have a de facto granted permission through that extended trial. So I think it will take a bit of political bravery and leadership in terms of actually kind of standing up and saying that and working closely with TFT to proactively regulate it rather than let tech companies tell us how they want to operate in our space in our cities. I don't know if are you but to add to that.
No, I would agree. So the Hackney Green Manifesto definitely wants to reduce car use, and whether it's by and car, just the amount of cars, whether they're parked or moving, both are equally wasteful of space. Stopping children playing on the street, stopping seating or planters being put into the street. So we want to, well, within within what a local authority is allowed to do, we're looking to put increased taxes on larger and heavier cars for parking at least, and then we want to reduce cars parked by having car clubs. So we really want to introduce car clubs so that there's one car club or one car parked on a street can replace at least 10 cars. So that's just the direction in which we're going, because eventually we want people not to have to use cars. But so that's on the way. So that's an interim measure on the way. And you want to introduce road pricing for through traffic too. So our target is to get people walking, cycling, and using the buses on our streets, on the main roads, because people talk a lot about people pushing all the traffic onto the main roads. So we want to reduce car traffic everywhere. So that's what we are. That's what we've been elected to do, and that's hopefully we'll do whatever we can within the legal, because the central government puts a lot of restrictions on what one can do. But we want to try side road zebras as well.
But that was going to be my question, because a lot of people don't realise that the larger roads are run by TfL.
TfL, yes.
And I was going to ask, what power do you have to restrict these larger roads? And with that, the free traffic. And is that like part of what you're saying? The charges.
The road user. So I think there's a trial, or we're lobbying TfL to allow certain boroughs to have a trial for road user charging, which has been talked about for years and years. And so we're trying to push that through, because some boroughs can, and Hackney, in fact, had volunteered to be one of the trials for through traffic on main roads. And that's what we'd like to push forward and lobby TfL.
Right.
So that's the main road. And then, of course, getting rid of car parking on main roads so that buses can travel quicker. So we had more questions here.
Yeah, should we take a few? Anthony, you have one as well. So should we take these two as well here?
I mean, mine was just going back to the e-bike issue. I think I'm working near AME. There is a significant portion of our work at night is stitching much of people off for e-bikes, and I think it's kind of going back to. I do think it is a problem, and I think the problem for we is that we've allowed kind of the companies, these large multinational companies, to self-regulate. I mean, other than when we get a line bike at 2 a.m., by definition, you would drop it. There are not many sober people doing that. And I think the test you have to do to pass a sobriety is it's like kind of a joke and how easy it is. And I guess I think, just going back to your point, I think is they need to, when pushing for increase active transport, you do have to recognize that sometimes there are disadvantages and there are challenges in the implementation.
Yeah, no, I think that's so.
And kind of made worse because Lime and other e-bikes, there's two sides of the coin here. One is that it got loads of people cycling, who weren't cycling before because they didn't have a bike. And, the people, so many people now cycle because of those, that Lime and bikes like and Voy. But then the flip side is that they're not actually used to cycling, and they're the ones who are, aren't really aware of the dangers. And so, yeah, I just wonder whether we're in a period of time now where there's people, it's going to take a while for people to realize that actually this is really dangerous, and I've got to, wear a helmet and maybe not ride a bike when I'm really drunk and that. But I think right now that's where we are, where people are just going, well, it's fun and it's cheap and it's available, and I'm just going to do it.
Yeah. Should we
Let's jump back to the question. Really is like, what is there like, everyone did quite a lot, but what is the detailed evidence to actually discourage car use? Is what I see car use is that people have a very emotional connection to their car, and increased costs doesn't reduce abusing their cars. People will pay up for fuel because that emotional connection to driving your car is more worth it. But people, and I can't see a difference with where he's charging really, he will be like, worth it,
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's different agendas in terms of how there's a kind of a whole bit of literature that we could unpack in terms of that question, because there's lots of different ways to do it and pricing and different strategies for it, and there is a sweet spot. There's one argument which is just around, very crudely, I think even the most ardent motorist agrees there is a negative externality to driving. Some of that is captured already in the form of road existing taxes and charges, but there's also massive subsidies from the government as well at the same time for that. And so the question is around how much of that negative externality you price. I've seen studies that quote that is around 76 cents. So what's that, around 65 pence per kilometre driven is the externality or cost in society, whether that's through crashes, whether that's through the infrastructure it takes to fight, whether that's through pollution, whether that's through time, that's from that. So I guess it's around how much of that, how many penny, at the moment we're capturing, well, probably some subsidies, probably, costing us as taxpayers a few pence to be able to get those people on the road. So there's a sweet spot somewhere between maybe you start off above 65, maybe going below, but there's a sweet spot in terms of that pricing there.
And I think it's very elastic. So as soon as you start charging people, they stop driving. I mean, in the Hackney marshes, they've recently introduced car parking charges. So people are running to park run rather than driving, and it's only £1 or £2, but people say, I refuse to pay it. Why should I pay it? I'm going to run there instead. And they say, and that'll teach them. They won't get their £2. And so this is literally what people are saying. And I've got so many friends who say, £12 to drive it to London. I'm just going to stop driving into London. I'm just going to take the train. That'll teach them. Literally, this is a different group of people. So people actually, anecdotally, that's the case. That people say, I'm not going... The charge really annoys people when something was free, and say, why are we suddenly being charged for this? So this was the ULEZ charge. People have older cars who are now having to pay. And they say, I'm being environmentally conscious. I'm keeping my old car. I'm not getting rid of it and buying a flash new car. And I'm being penalized for it. I'm just going to stop driving it. Let them do, and see if they, and then see if I care. So it's a stroppy response. But I think, and I'm sure the research Alpha's done here probably does show, that any small it's inconvenience or pricing actually significantly drops car use, because driving is literally a choice people make, and there are other alternatives. Unless you're absolutely disabled or you're having to carry, you're having to go with you're having to transport a disabled person or a sick person. I mean, there was other woman said, I've got my cats. How do I take them to the vet now? Okay. And she's blaming me because you've introduced all these low traffic neighborhoods, which I haven't because I was just a lobbyist. And she says, I've got to walk there now. I've got to walk my basket to the vet. So because otherwise I'm going to have to drive a long way. And it wasn't much longer. So just making it a bit more inconvenient does significantly drop the level of driving, because it's not and I'm sure Martha can speak much more about it than I can, about how how elastic it is. It's very, very elastic. It's not like water that you have to drink it or you'll die. It's absolutely something that you can. People leave their cars parked on the road for 96% of the time. They're only using it for 4% of the time. They don't need it. It's just there as a reassurance. They can drive it when they, once a year when they go and visit their mom out in the countryside. So it is not, I think you'll find, and the statistics show that it's a very elastic choice of driving a car. And
So
maybe you can elaborate on that.
we've got to wrap it up.
Should we do one final question for the and actually afterwards we're going to stick around for a few minutes, and we got a few books here as well if those can be convinced as well to on the road for revision. But should we take this question to the frontier? Sorry, sir, and then but we're going to be around afterwards, so we can answer any, but we'll continue.
Perhaps I should have put my hand up earlier. It's not a brief question, I'm afraid, but it's more a contribution to the conversation.
Please.
That you said. First, I'll make an observation. I think I'm the only woman in the audience which says something about car culture, interest in transport patterns, etc. And I just come back from a month cycling around the Netherlands. So you can imagine I have various perspectives on all of this. One thing that I was looking at is a place in the Netherlands that physically explains everything that YouTube videos such as Bicycle Dutch and Not Just Bikes explain so well by video.
Yeah.
There is something coming up, the Utrecht Bicycle Museum, which is a project. It isn't out of space yet, but it's in the works. And I'm looking into collaborating with them in some way. In the course of the conversations I had to find out about this, I had some wonderful conversations, and it came up with a very interesting metric of car use, which I want to share with you. Most British people think the Netherlands is great for cycling and therefore bad for motorists. In fact, it is, of course, very good for motorists because it's good for cyclists. I'm sure most people in this room know that. I was speaking to a family man. He's got a car because he's got kids, because sometimes the most sensible thing to do is to use a car. One of his kids gets car sick very easily. He can drive across the country to visit one set of grandparents, and he'd brake from outside his house to outside his parents' house, driving for an hour or two. And he says, and I need to brake maybe twice, maybe not at all. His kid doesn't get car sick. His wife is Spanish. They drive to Spain a lot. Spain is a car-centered country. You'd think it would be easy to drive there, but no, stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. Kid gets sick all the time. So there's a metric for you. How often do your kids get sick in the back of the car?
That's brilliant. As I still get car sick, so I can definitely rate this metric.
So everything's smooth and well designed. You don't need to be braking and stopping.
Yeah.
An easier journey for the people for whom a car does make sense to make that journey, because the other options are there, and they're very real options of public transport and cycling and more humans.
I think it would be interesting your views as well, Chris, both of you. But my initial thought is, so often, and we talk a little bit about this in the book as well, about people who've had their life threatened, people who've been attacked or nearly assassinated through their views on cars. This is so often seen as such a divisive, such a controversial, conflict-ridden issue. And I think if we take the kind of the principle out of what you're saying there, in terms of saying there are ways that you can have your cake and eat it here, to find ways that you can have some car either ownership or access for special needs or events, alongside a really thriving city and a thriving lifestyle and ways of getting around that city. And we're, because of a whole bunch of reasons which we unpacked in our talk, there's a lot of emotion here. And so trying to find those ways to actually zoom out and find those win-wins, and which the really successful LTNs have done, is I guess what the essence of that point is. So thank you for that
The
contribution.
Netherlands has designed out conflict from its society in many ways. And in many ways, Britain's designed conflict into society. It doesn't have to be that way. If there was one thing which I could do, it would be to get local councillors from Hackney and from many other places to the Netherlands on study tours for a few days, just to see how another world is possible.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting, and also how that world took half a century to get to that point. So it's an easy thing for us to say now and see the results, but it took a lot of conflict, hard work, citizen-led action and activism to move it.
Curious, start with that,
Completely. Yeah. So I think we're tight on time. So if everyone's happy to stick around, and we can continue the conversation. But thank you very, very much for coming, and huge welcome as well.